Is he an applicant?
Yeah, let's have the appellant go first.
Yeah.
The
Go right
entity
ahead.
filing the appeal.
First, let me say that I don't think staff has served you well in this particular instance. In that, when they first sent out their recommendations on this project, the recommendations included the fact that the project as proposed is consistent with the original negative declaration for the project. And we got that and we thought, okay, that's nice. So we requested a copy of the negative declaration for the project. At which point we were informed that, well, it would take a couple of weeks to find that because it was in storage and staff didn't know where it was. So staff certified to the Planning Commission and the City Council that it was consistent with the prior environmental review without looking at that prior environmental review. That to me is irresponsible. We requested notifications of all proposed environmental findings or anything else relative to this project. In spite of requesting that, we did not receive those notices. It's my understanding, based on what was just said, that documents have been prepared for this evening's hearing by the applicant and in response to the documents that we submitted. That's the first time we've heard of that. We had requested copies of the documents. That hasn't been done. You know, it's no wonder you guys get sued all the time. You don't follow the rules. I mean, it's a very simple matter. Follow the rules. They talk about this change being a minor change. This is down by the creek. It raises the average pad elevation in this tract to 4.9 feet. 4.9 feet over the entire tract. That's not a minor change. They're talking about moving 400,000 cubic yards of dirt. 400,000 cubic yards. That's 73,000 truck trips hauling dirt to and from the site to bring that dirt in. That's not a minor change. There was no haul of dirt considered within the original negative declaration. 400,000 yards of dirt puts well in excess of thresholds of significance for air quality impacts as a result of the project. It puts it well in excess of traffic impacts as a result of the project. Just for your edification, assuming that they do this over a 2-month period, that's 2.75 truck trips across, presumably they're coming across Clinton Keith, 2.75 truck trips per minute, every minute of the day. That's a lot of truck trips. Can your interchange at Clinton Keith going over the freeway, can it handle that kind of additional truck trips? I understand that they don't want to do environmental review because that's something that would cost money, and it would cost them money to mitigate the impacts that this project is going to have. But if you stop and think about it, if you fill the land on one side of the creek by 5 feet, 4.9 feet, to bring the houses out of the floodplain, what's that water going? Where's the water going to go that used to go into that 4.9 feet? The answer to that is it's going to be pushed over onto the other side of the creek, and it's going to increase flooding there. If there is an attempt to build later on the other side of the creek, then that creates ineffective damming, which means that the only way you can carry the same amount of flood water is to increase the velocity through that channelized section. And then as soon as it gets back out of that channelized section, the velocity will decrease and the sediment will all fall out, and it will exacerbate the sediment filling underneath the Clinton Keith Bridge. which since the time that the original initial study was done and now, the clearance under the bridge is decreased by over 2 feet. There's that much additional silt in the creek under the bridge. That's an environmental consequence that needs to be evaluated. Very simply, I understand that they want to do it on the cheap and they don't want to have to mitigate for their impacts. But if they don't mitigate for their impacts, that means that everybody else out here, sitting out here, is going to end up paying and subsidizing them to subsidize for the impacts of their project. And that's not fair to the rest of the citizens of Wildomar. And once again, I'm extremely disappointed that new documentation has been done. We had requested copies of everything, and yet we got nothing and knew nothing of it until this meeting tonight.
Are we into the rebuttal or their presentation? Rebuttal? All right, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor Swanson, Mayor Pro Tem Benoit, and members of the council. My name is Adam Smith with CD Communities, and we're here before you to address an appeal of the Planning Commission decision on the minor modification. The merits of the site plan change were not brought up in any of the appeals. The Planning Commission did vote unanimously in favor of the minor change. Because the appeal is basically legal matters based on CEQA, we've got an attorney with us tonight. This is Rick Shantar with Alan Mackins. He's a land use and environmental law attorney, and he's going to kind of go through his response to the appeal. We also will have a very brief summary presentation from Urban Crossroads. They're a traffic consultant who is the professionals in analyzing greenhouse gas and traffic impacts. And then we also have our civil engineer here as well if there's any questions later on. So with that, thank you.
Hello again. My name is Nick Shantar. I'm with the Alan Mackins law firm. I submitted the letter dated March 6th to the council. I will, in light of that containing most of my comments, I'll try to be as brief as possible. I take issue with everything that Mr. Johnson just said. Starting with the idea that somehow there were documents submitted late to this committee that he did not get. The whole purpose of our meeting on the 15th, I believe, last time, was so that we could prepare a response. And had he bothered to be here for that, he would know that. It's interesting to us that he had opposed our request to continue it and didn't show up at the meeting. So I find the notion that he couldn't get the documents to be very specious. I also want to point out that our letter and all its supporting materials were attached to the council's agenda packet, which was freely available on the website, and certainly he knows that. So I think that addresses those comments. As for why the city is, quote, always getting sued, I think we know the answer to that without going into detailed suffice to say I do not agree with his assessment. To address the merits of the appeal, the first thing claimed, and although Mr. Johnson didn't mention it, was that there's some kind of project segmentation going on, which is a violation of CEQA. Just very briefly, CEQA defines a project as the whole of the action, the whole of the project, everything being done. That absolutely has not changed. Yes, there was a development agreement, and now there are modifications to maps. Those are the same project, it's the same lots. Yes, there's a few, we're reducing 4 lots and putting in water basins, but those are the minor changes we're talking about tonight. It's the same project, there's no segmentation whatsoever. The county previously studied this with a lengthy M&D and determined that that was the appropriate level of review. So we're not starting from a blank slate here. There's no new impacts. In fact, the impacts are less, and that's all contained in the very detailed, very technical studies that were prepared and submitted in connection with my letter of March 6th. I also take issue with the notion that we don't want to do environmental review because we don't want to spend money, and some of the other comments made. We're here to do the review. We've done the review. An appeal was filed that raises numbers completely pulled out of the air. If you look at the footnote in the appeal, it basically says, I'm just making these numbers up on my assumptions. We're not going on assumptions. We went and got the consultants to come forward with real data, with real information, put it in these letters and put it in the record and came to you with it. It's not because we're afraid to spend money, it's because we take these concerns very, very seriously, and we wanted to address them. And what those conclusions show is that we're going down from 454,000 cubic yardage that was assumed with the prior approvals, which included, the prior approvals included the raising of these sites. And that was going to result in 454,000 cubic yards of import before shrinkage. And what we're doing, because we are cutting additional areas on the project site, we are reducing that from 454,000 to just 220,000 after shrinkage. So roughly 160 before shrinkage, 220. So that's a huge decrease. And it's taking Mr. Johnson's numbers on truck trips and everything else, we go from 73,000 truck trips. Again, that was what was previously approved before this modification, all the way down to 53,000 fewer truck trips. So the amount of impacts here are significantly less, and we believe the data absolutely shows that. As far as those impacts, they were studied before. There are several conditions in the county's MNDs, or that resulted from the condition approvals that resulted from the MNDs, including 60 BS grade 2 and 3, 10 BS grade 4, and excuse me. As mentioned previously, we do have an urban crossroads study, and Mr. Asif will be here to address that very, very briefly when I'm done. But suffice it to say, the evidence is there. There is minimal, in fact, there are no new impacts, and indeed less. Two last points in the appeal are that there's no substantial evidence to support the city's findings. Well, there's nothing in the appeal that supports that, and if you take one brief look at the staff report and the agenda, you'll see that's just simply not true. Staff has made very detailed findings here. There's also a claim that one of the maps, 25122, is expired. It's not. It was extended multiple times by the county before the city incorporated, extended by the city itself in 2009, and extended under various statutory extensions since then. And in any event, if there was a problem with any extension, it needed to be addressed long ago, not years and years after the fact. It's not just sitting out there for somebody to come along. There's a specific 90-day statute of limitations under the government code, and that is there to prevent this type of thing from happening. Somebody coming along 4 years later and raising an issue is something that was done long, long ago. So in conclusion, I'll wrap up. The project has been thoroughly studied and evaluated. The proposed changes are very, very minor. Again, think of the whole project. Not just looking at one little piece and saying, has that changed? Oh, maybe that little piece changed a little bit. But if you look at the whole of the project, which is what SEQA requires you to do, these are very, very minor changes. Less impacts than before. Frankly, we see no basis to overturn the Planning Commission's decision. So, thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Councilors. My name is Hasib Qureshi, Senior Associate with Urban Crossroads. We were retained by the applicant to provide some supplemental analysis in support of the project to confirm that there are in fact no significant impacts associated with the import activities related to the project site, in a rebuttal to the comment letter that was provided. So we evaluated the potential impacts associated with hauling truck traffic as well as the air quality emissions that could be associated with hauling and soil import activities. As previously noted, the project does in fact result in substantially fewer cubic yardage import for the project as proposed compared to the original approvals, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 300,000 to 400,000 cubic yards fewer, depending on if you're looking at the numbers before or after shrinkage, which would also result in substantially fewer number of truck trips and thereby fewer air quality emissions related to those trips. The results of the analysis that are in the staff report that you have before you confirm that the project impacts related to soil import activities would not result in a significant impact for traffic and air quality, and that the project would be subject to the conditions that were set forth in the staff report to ensure that those impacts are indeed less than significant. And again, as I noted previously, the project would result in fewer haul truck trips and subsequently fewer air quality and greenhouse gas emissions when compared to the original approvals. Very brief presentation. The details are all, in the staff report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. But that's all I have at the moment.
Thank you. Is there any other rebuttal?
Really quickly, the site map, site plan is a good plan, it's a better plan. It provides for emergency access, it realigns a street away from right in front of Gina Castanon's house. Further down where it would align with a future project if it were approved. And I think the merits of the minor changes warrant their approval following the Planning Commission's unanimous approval. And in regards to the floodplain issues raised, I have, if you recall, we went through this with the development agreement, this presentation, and so we've kind of already beat that one, but I would like to submit this to you guys just for the record, and then if you have any questions regarding this or anything since the DA will be happy to approach those.
Well, again, just very briefly, I forgot to mention something. You'll notice in the staff report and in the Urban Crossroads report attached to my March 6th letter, there are some mitigation measures proposed. I want to be very clear that we don't think those are required under CEQA. Those are simply additional steps that CED is willing to take on a purely voluntary basis to accommodate any concerns with maybe the trucks. There's not going to be 2.7 trucks a minute or a second or whatever he said coming over the bridge, especially with those mitigation measures, which we're again willing to voluntarily adopt to address concerns even though they're not needed.
So those mitigation measures limit the number of trucks per day and limit the number of truck trips during peak hours. So that's what we have. If there are any public speakers that we
The clerk will call them. Yes.
Okay, and if we might be available to rebut any of that, I'd like to do so.
And if the appellant has anything additional to add at this moment also before we go into
Before we go to public?
the full public comment.
See, I'm learning.
Bear with us, Ray, this is our first one, and we didn't know that was you out there in the audience, so thank you.
That's right. I find it difficult to believe that you can raise the pad elevations 5 feet from what was originally approved and decrease the amount of dirt that's brought in. According to the original initial studies that were done, there was not going to be 5 feet of fill brought in. I'm extremely distressed at the fact that we specifically had requested notices, and yet we got no information about any of this material that had been submitted. I'm sorry I wasn't here whenever they had the meeting last week or week before. 2 weeks ago, I think is what he said. I was actually in Inland Valley having a shoulder replacement at that time, so I'm going to attest to the fact that Inland Valley does do a decent job. I'm pretty good. Doing okay for 2 weeks out. But you know, the fact that we requested the information and we were not notified that new information had been submitted so that we could evaluate it and look at it. You know, even if they'd said, hey, well, hey, by the way, there's stuff that's available on the internet. It's not attached to the staff report that's available to the public. I don't think the public has seen any of this material that you all are looking at. And I find that extremely distressing. And once again, I will stick by our numbers that we have in there. You can't raise the elevation by 5 feet and say that you're bringing in less dirt than you were before when the original said you weren't bringing in dirt period. I'm also somewhat distressed that these documents that are going out were not sent out to Fish and Game or to the Regional Water Quality Control Board for their review and comment prior to going to the city. You know, that's, once again, you're just asking for problems if you don't submit that material that you're required to the state agencies for their review prior to approval.
Madam Mayor, before public comment, could staff address those issues as well, and if you think to address them? regarding documents?
Well, sure, I'd be
Where
more
they're
than
at
happy on
those.
a couple of items. Mr. Johnson did mention that we had lost the MND. That's just not true. The MND, the original MND, was presented back to the Planning Commission in August when the development agreement went through, and it's been at every single meeting in the agenda packets since then, up until this time as well. I don't recall receiving any specific request for information from him. I do not have a letter. He does not have that information requesting that in his appeal letter. But again, standard practice is that we post the agenda online. It's available. I know I believe Mr. Johnson is on our Stay Connected list. So when that mass email goes out with the city's council's agenda packet or planning commission agenda packet, it's there.
The documents that were mentioned they're on there, they're attached to that agenda packet?
Absolutely. It's in your agenda packet right here. All the conditions of approval, the environmental assessment, all the technical studies that the applicant did as well. It's there, and it's in public information. And so on those two items, that's all I need to say. And then if Dan wants to talk about some of the pad elevation things, we can, if that's, I think, what you asked for.
Yeah, regarding the pad elevations, it is not 4.9 feet across the entire site. There are a few isolated pads that are raising 4.9 feet. They are closer to the channel. Part of those raising is to get them out of the floodplain relative to the back water on McVicker. But the majority of the pads are changing, within inches or half a foot. The other thing to be important is this project has always been a fill job, meaning that material was to come into the project, and at this point in time, what has been presented is been consistent and approved by staff.
Public comments.
We have one. Ms. Miller?